I guess the topic is the Tower of Bavel, so we'll take it from there. So actually we just, the two events that just happened, one is the Mabul, the flood, which you learned about last week. And this week we'll focus on the Tower of Bavel. We'll contrast the two and also explain what was behind it. So it's an interesting medrash that actually Rashi quotes that what was the reason, what was the motivation for the people building the tower? Why are they building a Tower of Bavel? What was the motivation? So Rashi quotes three different possibilities, and we'll see, perhaps they're all true. That they wanted to form a unity in terms of that it's a Safa Achas, the pasuk says, one, they wanted to be all together. It was a sign of unity, everyone working together in order to build this major project, and that's why they were doing it. Another reason was they figured out, I think it was 1656, if I remember the exact year, that every 1656 years the water gets too strong for the clouds in the sky, and therefore we're going to have another flood. So we're going to be prepared this time. No one hangs out in the basement during a flood, and it's not good to have it's not good to have a basement when there's flooding going on. But so in terms of that, they just thought it was a natural idea to move up to the highland and build a tower. And the third approach he brings down is that they're actually fighting a war against God. They went up, the bow and arrows couldn't reach from the ground. They figured they'll build the highest building possible, and then get the best sharpshooter and try to get some missiles, some bow and arrows, whatever they had during those days, to fight a war with God. So the three different motivations. One seemed to be, at first glance, one was of unity, which at first glance is a good thing. The other one was it was neutral. They just viewed it as a natural event, and they just taking some fact when you know the floods are coming, you get the sandbags ready, you evacuate, you board up the windows. They just did what they thought was the natural event. And the third one was they were doing a war on God. So that's one medrash. There's another medrash that we'll try to tie into it. There's another interesting medrash. Whatever happened to the Tower of Bavel? Where is it today? It'd be a great sightseeing Disney place. A lot of people would pay a lot of money to see it. Where is this Tower of Bavel? So the medrash says a third of it is no longer here. A third of it got burnt up, is no longer with us. A third of it is sunk down into the ground, and once in a while it pops its head up once in a while. And a third of it, the other third that's left, is so tall that when you look from the top, if you're sitting on top of this tower, you look down, that the people look like little ants. In other words, it's essentially so far, the stern of it is so high that when the grasshoppers, the people look like grasshoppers. And so what is the meaning of this medrash? Obviously, that doesn't mean literally, because I think we would have found it. Apparently, it was a big tower, and we would have found it by now. So it's not necessarily to be taken literally. What's the message behind this medrash, which says that a third of it is burnt up, doesn't exist anymore? A third of it is sunk into the ground, it pops up its head once in a while, and a third is so high that people look like grasshoppers. So perhaps it's tied into that three things I started off the class with, in terms of the motivation behind the building of the Tower of Bavel. So in other words, what's the third that's burnt? What don't we have anymore? So people going ahead and shooting arrows at the heavens and shooting missiles in the sky, that we don't have. In fact, we have a lot better or worse. No one fights against God anymore. Why fight him what's the saying goes, you might as well, join them. In other words, everyone has God on their side. Every evil person, every terrorist, are you kidding me? I'm fighting the war of God. I'm not fighting against God. So that concept of fighting wars against God, that doesn't exist anymore. Everyone seems to have God on their side. So that's totally burned. We don't have that anymore. A third that pops up once in a while, but it's usually something. And once in a while, you have this United Nations, these peace treaties that they start off. Basically, practically, they're irrelevant. They don't really do anything practically. But every once in a while, let's have some universal peace. Let's have some meetings. Maybe we'll do things. That always pops up during the time, and that's what they have. We have the United Nations Day or similar organizations like that. They say they're into universal peace, but they don't really have any teeth. They're not really effective, and they really can't do anything. So that's basically buried, but it pops up its head every once in a while. So what's this third of the tower that's still up there? That it's so big that two things look like grasshoppers. So that's the concept of. So what did they think? Why did the flood come? They thought the flood was a natural occurrence. It was a natural event of history, that it's a physical thing. The sky is the water. You just can't hold each other. Of course, they didn't think that perhaps maybe people did something wrong. They were evil, and God had to destroy the world. They basically took the act of God and the punishment and basically turned it into a natural event. In other words, what do we have today? So today we see that all the time. Whether we start off with Israel, all the different miracles, whether it's during the Scud missiles, any type of damage is bad, but compared to what they could have caused, they fall in different places. All the different things that we see happen. In fact, we don't even know half the things because we only hear about some of it, and a lot of it doesn't even make it because they get stopped before they make it over to Israel, or they kill themselves when they're making bombs, blowing up themselves. In fact, it's a saying we say in Hallel. It says, Hallelu Hashem kol goyim. It says, the non-Jews should praise the Lord. Like, why should they praise the Lord more than we should? So that's what the Vilna Gaon explains, because the anti-Semites know how often they try to make attacks on Israel, attack Jews throughout the world, and we don't even know whether it's 50%, 90%, how many times that they fight among themselves, they blow themselves up, whatever happens, we don't even know. So they should see the hand of God, because so many times they've tried to attack Israel. Of course, 10% of the time is bad enough as it is, but all the times they could have attacked and they didn't, that was something that they should realize. And in fact, it's interesting to note that when we talk about miracles, it says, what's known as the prototype of all miracles? We always know Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the Red Sea. That's always known as the prototype. Why is that picked as a prototype of all miracles? There are many other miracles that God did that were probably a lot greater in quality. It's nice, but to split the sea in 12 ways and have the people walk through, it's a nice miracle, but God did many other things, stopping the sun, moon.
Well, I think it's important because it was something that there were many phases to it, many sides to it, but it was something that was witnessed by everybody that was there. It wasn't something that was just alone for us. It wasn't when we go to Har Sinai and we get the Torah, it's just for us. Yes, all the Jews were involved, but there was nobody else there. Where the flood, the splitting of the Red Sea wasn't just for us, it was for the whole world to see. Because the Egyptians were killed, so the story was told.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, very good, interesting. Anyone want to suggest something else? So others suggest that what was the greatness of the splitting of the Red Sea? It wasn't so much in the supernatural miracle. The miracle was nice, but God did many greater supernatural miracles. It's what happened after the miracle. What we read it every day in davening. We say right before we sing Oz Yoshia Moshe, before we sing the Shira in davening, we say Vayaminu v'Hashem u'v'Moshe Abdo Oz Yoshia Moshe. It says they believed in God and Moshe the servant, and now we're thanking Oz Yoshia, and now we're praising God for the tremendous miracle. So it's the association with the divine that makes it spectacular. In other words, Eliyahu HaNavi at Har Carmel, Mount Carmel, he knew that quite well, because there was an incident where he had to have a big, the Jews were schizophrenics. They were half the day they were worshiping idols, the other half the day they were worshiping God. And Eliyahu said, that's it, we can't go on like this. You got to stop sitting on the fence. You got to make a choice. It's either going to be God or the idol. You can't have it both ways. In fact, interesting, that's what some point out in this week's parsha, which is the parashas told us when Vayitzrotzdu Habanim B'Kirba, it talks about the birth of Esav and Yaakov. So it says, so Rivka was having a hard time with the pregnancy, and she, Vatelach with Rosh, and she went to find out what was going on. So, because what does the Medrash say? That when she passed by a house of idol worship, Esav tried to get out. When he passed by a synagogue, a yeshiva, Yaakov tried to get out, and therefore it was causing her all this pain. So she thought, I have a schizophrenic inside. I don't know, I'm really in trouble. This person. And then he said, don't worry, it's going to be twins. It's two different. So she felt much better. Because at least each one has their own direction. Interesting. The Welt says over. They ask a question on that. What do you mean? We have a Jewish tradition in the Talmud and other places that before every Jew is born, when they're pregnant in the womb, an angel comes down and teaches them the whole Torah. That every child, boy, girl, everyone in the womb, that taught all the Torah. And before they come out, they're given a little patch on the mouth, or we have a little thing here, and we forget everything. Of course, the question is, why waste my time then? Teach it to me, and then I'm going to forget? No, to show each Jew is capable of learning different parts of the Torah, we have the capability. But the question is, if you have an angel teaching you the Torah, why was Yaakov trying to get out? You have the best teacher in the world. Where are you running to? So the joke goes, because if you have a learning partner like Esav, you want out of there. Now we see sometimes the chavrusa, the environment, plays more of a role than the teacher. And we know that we see, being a teacher, you see it all the time, depending on, with the kids around them and the environment, that's equally as important as getting the right teacher. But that's what Rivka thought. She was in trouble. She was very worried. It's schizophrenic. Okay, twin. But getting back here, so that's what Eliyahu was saying. Get your act together. Get off the fence. You got to make a decision. Who you going to? So let's have a big contest on Har Carmel, and basically the old day of Avodah, the worshippers of idols, you bring your sacrifice, I'll bring mine, and we'll see. Whoever the fire comes down, we'll know that'll be the victory. We'll know the right. So what happened? So they had the contest, and the fire came down and answered Eliyahu. So it's interesting. Eliyahu's prayer, he says, Aneni Hashem Aneni. He says, answer me, God, answer me. Like, why is he repeating himself? Like, God's a good listener. I'm sure he understood the first time. Listen, God, listen to me. Listen to me, God, listen to me. That's what the commentators explain. I need two. One, listen to me is, I want you to answer me that the miracle comes and the fire comes down and consumes my sacrifice. But Eliyahu knows people can see many miracles, but it has zero impact on you. It's Aneni Hashem. Not only do I want you to answer me on the miracle, but answer me that the Jewish people are going to do tshuva. Because as Maimonides writes, no one becomes a believer based on miracles alone. You're a fool if you disbelieve based on miracles. It reminds me of the Bobo the acrobat story. Famous acrobat in Niagara Falls. I've heard it in different names, but the story is the same. That Bobo the acrobat, he invited everyone one day to come down to Niagara Falls. I'm going to do a tremendous thing. I want everyone to come down and look. And he said, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to walk tightrope across the falls, across Niagara Falls. He said, wow, Bobo, wow, amazing. And he goes ahead and he walks across. So he says, oh, Bobo, you're amazing. He says, are you kidding me? This is nothing. Come back tomorrow. Bring your friends. I'm going to do something even better. So tomorrow, instead of hundreds of people, it's thousands of people show up and say, wow, Bobo, what are you going to do? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a blindfold on. I'm going to tightrope Niagara Falls with the blindfold without even seeing. Oh, wow, Bobo, he goes across, they're all yaying, clapping, he makes it. and everyone's ecstatic. Bobo, you're the greatest. We really believe in you. You're amazing. He says, come back tomorrow. You haven't seen anything yet. Thousands more come. And he says, you know what I want to do today? I want to go over on the tightrope with the blindfold, and he had a wheelbarrow with him, and I want to push someone across with me. Any volunteers? Silence in the crowd, no volunteers. Because, no one actually believes based on miracles. In other words, you can do all the miracles you want. There's no, it's nice that God, see, that's the difference between Judaism and other religions. God only does miracles when there's a need for them. God doesn't do miracles for the sake of miracles. Other religions, they claim, they do miracles just for the sake of miracles, but we only do miracles, but even when God does miracles, it's not, it might strengthen your belief, but if your belief is just based on miracles, like people say, what have you done for me lately, God? If I win the lottery, then I'll believe. Or if I'll do this, if I get to hit now, if I get this, whatever you can fill in the blanks. That person always, they want the answer right away. But that's what the Rambam writes. No one believes based on miracles. So Eliyahu knew that quite well. Aneni Hashem Aneni. Answer me, God, that the fire comes down. But I know that's not enough. Answer me that the Jewish people who associate this with the divine, they realize it's a miracle from God, and they should stop believing in God. And that was the greatness of the Red Sea, is it's this association with divine. Moshe led to belief in God. Yes, Sam had a question or a comment.
Oh, well, okay, I'll go back to it. It was something I wanted to say about Rivka.
Yeah, okay.
Because, yes, she had twins inside of her, but what she said was actually a very wise thing to say too, and that is that I have a schizophrenic inside of me. Because I think part of what it's saying when it said that when you came to a house of worship, Jacob wanted to jump out, but when you came to whatever it was, what was it?
Sure, whatever, basic. Yeah.
No.
Church, idol worship, yeah.
Idol worship, or worship of worldly things, right, or worship of that kind of thing. Then Esau broke out. I actually think that every one of us is a schizophrenic in this sense. There's a part of us who wants to jump out when he or she sees a house of worship, and there's actually a part of us that wants to jump out when there are worldly things to be gained. And I think also that the story of Yaakov says, and I think there may even be some rabbinic backing for this, was that in order to survive, it wasn't enough for him to be a Yaakov. He had to be an Esav as well. He had to take on himself part of the character of Esav in order, for instance, to be able to lie to his father, so that it is necessary for us to know when to jump out the way Jacob would have jumped out, and when to jump out the way Esav would have jumped out. And there's sort of a pun in the text that I like very much, because Jacob is said to be Tom.
Ishtam,
wholehearted, pure. But the Hebrew word for twins is tamim, which sounds an awful lot like Tom, and it seems to be the opposite idea. It may not be orthographically the same, but the rabbis are always fascinated by different words that sound the same. So the idea that being really one in myself and really being two in myself are related to sound like the same Hebrew word is something to think about, because Jacob wasn't a completely wholehearted person. He didn't become completely what he needed to be until he had in himself, he was able to utilize both the pure part and the impure part. Does that make any sense?
100%. It's everything in degrees. Like we're all, like there's some people who are clinically schizophrenic, But
Well, we're not
exactly
talking-
right. No, 100%. That we all have to take, different aspects. We have to take. There are aspects we can learn from Esav, and aspects we can learn. Many things you can learn. Learn from Esav how his, whether his devotion to his father. In fact, the Talmud, one of the rabbis in Talmud says, "I wish I did 1/100th of the honoring of my parents the way, if I came 1/100 what Esav did, I'd be happy." So, because he said, what does it mean? Because he says, because when Esav went to see his father, he always came with special food and special clothing. He put on his Shabbos suit, his Yontif clothes, and he felt he was in someone important's presence. He didn't show up in his shorts and t-shirts. He came in his top clothing. He says, "I wish I was on the level of Esav. I used to visit my parents in my regular clothes. And Esav, he put on special clothes. He bought them special food." So
but
the question,
he didn't marry the girl his parents wanted him to marry.
right? So the question is, so talk is cheap. Like, okay, but don't say how you want to be. Go into your closet, put on your suit, and then visit you while you're talking about it like you can't do it. So the commentators explain, of course it doesn't mean literally that wasn't the actual clothing, it wasn't the actual food, it was the attitude. Asa felt he was in a special presence to his father. I wish I had that feeling. I could go through the motions, put on the clothing, and do that, but I'm bemoaning the feeling. I wish I was on Esav's level, that I could even come close to his feeling and his gratitude to his father. And the physical things we could go through, whether that will help us get there, that depends on, that's the old dispute in terms of how you get there. Do you do, you have the internals and the externals, which one comes first? Do you say, so one school of thought is the externals come first, go through and then eventually you'll get the feeling inside. Another school of thought says, no, first you build up the inside, and then you do the outside. So I heard an interesting parable. So actually the truth is, at least I'm just commenting on today's society, my opinion anyway, maybe it used to be that's the way maybe it used to work that way. You first build up the outside and the inside will come. But today in a society where we live with a bunch of phonies and fakers, I think it has to be the opposite. We build up on our inside, and then we do. I'll give you a modern day equivalent. When you put a hamburger, steak, whatever you eat, into an oven, so how does it work in an oven? Basically, first the outside gets cooked, and then eventually the outside goes to the inside. Today it's not so new anymore, but the microwave. How does the microwave work? It gets into the core, and then so we're living in the microwave age where I think we have to work on our inside. But again, everything in balance doesn't mean you totally ignore your outside either. As you should be both on the inside and the outside, but in terms of whether you grow from in or in out, that depends on the society, and the times. Yeah.
Could I add to Sam's comments before? Sam said, we are all known as being schizophrenics. Actually, the statement somebody else made, which may be true, but they said, all you Jews, you're all paranoiacs, also paranoia. And there was a psychiatrist who said that they would be crazy not to be. And this is very true for our...
No, exactly. Whether it's all, coming, whether they meant in terms of from anti-Semitism, whatever the context was made, but right, after going through the Holocaust, how could you not be?
You adapt yourself to your environment.
That's survival.
So maybe, Sam, it's the environment that we live in that makes us schizophrenic.
I would say it's what the world is like. That's all. That's what it means by saying the environment. We know what the world is like. And it goes right back to something Rabbi Sullivan said about the fact that we don't rely on miracles. In other words, you can say that that's a kind of paranoia. Well, God did it for me before, but I don't trust Him to do it for me again. And I know that certainly with some of my Christian friends are more likely to say, put yourself in the hands of God and everything will be all right, than most of the Jews I know. Regardless of what the tradition says, the average Jew say, put yourself in the hands of God, and everything will be all right. You don't have to do anything. They say, are you crazy? So in fact, I think that little streak in Judaism of not trusting rather than trusting, it's what makes Jewish humor so sarcastic, for instance, and all kinds of other things. So I think, yes, there is a message about paranoia as well as a message about schizophrenia.
But in
Not to mention manic depressive. Like you've got your manic note in one pocket and you've got your depressive note in the other pocket, and you take one out when you need it.
I found very interesting.
That's what it had. It said there was one great rabbi he had something in each pocket. In one pocket said, the world was created for me.
That's manic.
Yeah, right, and the other, saying, basically, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing. So depending, when you're feeling a little haughty, you take out one. When you take, those are the two schools of two of the big yeshivas in Europe. One was Slobodka, it's a town in Europe. It was the name of a famous yeshiva, and Navardik. And there were two. They both had the same approaches to get closer to God, but two totally different approaches how to get there. Slobodka was, that's how great a human being is. How could that mouth you're using to pray with and other things, how could you say different things? They used to build you up in order not to do things wrong. Like it's just, you're a bubble, and the Vardik was like, you're a nobody, you're a nothing, like there's, they totally took out the I, like in contrast to the iPod, all that thing is, they took out the I, nothing's for you. They used to, and of course in life, there's always, you need a balance. The trick is taking the right medicine at the right time. The problem is if the person's depressed, they don't want to hear about how good they are. They want to hear how terrible they are. And when a person's haughty, they don't want to hear how bad. They want to hear how the world was created for me. So the trick is always having the right balance. The trick is taking the right medicine at the right time. They're both out there. You just have to know what the right dose and the right time. Yeah, Ira.
Yeah, just to lend to both of your comments, including yours, the last one that ties it really nicely. I heard a midrash once about the difference between Yitzhak and Esav was that Esav was bound to and became the father of chaos. And I think I've said this before, and Yaakov was bound to and became the father of order. Even in order, for it to work properly, you have to have two sides. In everything in nature, there's two sides. If you don't have this, you won't have this. And that was the duality of Yaakov, was that not so much that he had to lend himself more to Esav, it was just part of who he was supposed to be. That you need to be able to do those two things for it to work properly. So it's a balance, which is what you were just saying.
So order is important, but you got to be able to let yourself go occasionally.
From time to time,
Yeah, okay.
if for it to work in everything in life, right? I mean, if there's no, everything in life has a rhythm. Everything in life, and I think this is the way that it was meant to be. Was that there's rhythms and there's opposing sides. If you don't have bad, then there's no good, right? You just can't have good because then you don't know the difference between good and bad. You can't have cold without hot because you don't know the difference. You have to have opposing balances to understand that this is very cold and this is very hot. And sometimes something that's very, 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 very cold, when you touch it, can feel very, very, very hot, which is interesting.
Well, it depends at what temperature the thing is
right.
touched with it.
Do you think it might be?
It's called chaos theory. People have studied. There's a whole science of chaos, and they explain how things are interdependent. Even when something looks very chaotic to us, when actually examined scientifically, we find that things are all interconnected. Nothing happens without a reason. Nothing. So this is very interesting. And in fact, a lot of Jews have been in that particular field in chaos theory. Now, what I want to say is this, I found very interesting what you said about the nature of a miracle. So if I understood you rightly, then a miracle, first of all, that needs someone to originate an action that is miraculous. But in order to make it a miracle, you also need people to believe in it. Is that true? In other words, without that belief that it is a miracle, it's not a miracle.
I mean, it depends what we mean. I'm saying, obviously, from a physical point of view, you can have plenty of miracles without belief. But in terms of what the Jewish concept,
I'm talking about the
Jewish concept, what the purpose of a miracle is to strengthen your faith. So so from that point of view, if God does the miracle and nothing happens, it was kind of like a blessing in vain. But I wouldn't say, so from that point of view, you're right. It's like the miracle never happened. But we're not discussing from a physical. Obviously, if something which breaks the laws of nature happens, so in fact that's what the Ramban points out. Nachmanides, he says, what's the difference between what we call miracle and what we call nature? He says something that happens all the time, we call nature. Something that happens once in a while, we call miracles. He gives an example. He said, like when the Jews were traveling in the desert, so they ate food from heaven. And then when they entered the land of Israel, Joshua said, no more food in heaven. You know what's going to happen? You got to work for a living. You got to plant and harvest. They said, what? You mean if I put this little seed in the ground, food's going to... Wow, what a miracle, Yoshua. How are you going to pull that one off? But if I told you, food, we're going to get mud tomorrow, that would be a miracle. It's all in how we perceive it. So that's what the Bali Musar point out, that really it's a greater miracle that a child being born than it is resurrecting the dead. But big deal, if you put a child being born, you put it on the front line in a paper, oh, big deal. You won't sell any papers. But wow, I resurrected. But the body's already there, it just has to be resurrected. But a body to be created from a little putrid drop, that's what tremendous. So we do see that in terms of what I was saying, the power of contrast. Judaism is very big on contrast in terms of, let's go to Passover night, Pesach night. So besides eating the matzah, we have to tell over the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So the Talmud tells us we have to begin with the negative and then end on the positive. No, what I mean by the negative is we have to talk about our history. Either we were slaves in Egypt, or we came from idol worshippers, whatever the beginning of our history was, and then we end off with we talk about the Exodus of Egypt. So the question is, if the night of Passover we're celebrating the Exodus from Egypt, why waste my time? I don't want to hear the bad stuff tonight. I don't want to hear about my forefathers were idol worshippers, or we used to be slaves in Egypt. Let's just get to the good stuff. And the answer is no. In order to appreciate the good stuff, you got to know where you were before. You have to know that at one point you were a slave, at one point free. So, for instance, I try to appreciate as much as I can the ability to see, the ability to walk. But that's on an intellectual level. But someone who couldn't walk, or someone was once blind, and now they could see, that's a totally different appreciation. So if you don't know what darkness is, you don't know what light is, and the reverse. So we always see the power. That's what the chief rabbinate did. What do we have right before Yom HaAtzmaut, right before the day where we celebrate the independence? We have Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance, because to fully appreciate our independence, we got to know what you gave up for it. All the Jewish soldiers, wives, men, women, children, all the people that sacrificed and continue to sacrifice. So you have to fully understand what it is. You have to know what people gave up. So we see in many areas we see the power of contrast. And getting back to Sam's point about learning from all angles, that's what, in fact, the same that we see later on. It says that Yaakov, he went to the yeshiva Shem ve'Aver. He went to the yeshiva Shem, from Noach's kids and that. So the question is, Yaakov is sitting and learning all day. He was Ishtam Yoi v'Holam. Like he just spent 14 years. He spent all this time learning. Now he has to go. What's he going to learn more about? So there are many answers, but one is there are two Torahs, meaning there's one Torah, but the one is the pure Torah. You open up the book, you read the details of the law, etc. The more rigid, this is Shabbos, this is kosher, etc. And then there's a second aspect where you have to know how to apply the things. It's taking what we call the 4 books of law, but we call it the 5th Shulchan Aruch, is the law of seichel, common sense, and as Mark Twain said, unfortunately, common sense ain't too common, and the problem is you can't teach it, but the point being is you have to know how, so we have a discussion, though some point out, there's 2 great rabbis, Rav and Shmuel. So when it comes to halachas of kosher, tefillin, whatever, issa v'heter, we ask him, he gives us our answer. When it comes to civil manners and monetary matters, we go to Samuel, Shmuel. So the question is why? In pure learning, Rav was the bigger Torah scholar. So when it comes to a pure halacha question, where it doesn't make a difference if you're living in the 21st century, the 19th century, if it's a pure halacha question, it doesn't make a difference where you are. Kosher is kosher. But Shmuel is that you have to know. You have to be actually live in this world to know how to answer questions. In fact, that's why when the Messiah comes, it says Eliyahu, the prophet, will come down and answer our questions. The question is, why Eliyahu? Moses is our teacher. He should be answering all our questions. So the answer is Moses has been dead for many years. But we have a tradition that Eliyahu is still alive. He comes down to every circumcision. He visits us on Pesach. He drinks from his cup all the time. So whatever that means exactly, but Eliyahu is alive. So it's about, he's around. So in order to paskin a shaila, you have to actually know what's going on in the world. So obviously, if it's a technical, is the meat kosher or not, is it, so then you don't have to be involved in the world. You could just know, you have to know what Jewish law says. But if you want to know, people make a business deal. Okay, is a handshake considered a valid deal? You have to know what society views in order to actually take the Jewish principle and apply. You have to know how the world works. So Rav was in pure learning, he was the best, and we followed him. But Shmuel, he was the man of the world. He was involved with people, and he knew how it worked. So he has to go. So that's what Sam was saying. In other words, in terms of there is Yaakov, the pure learning, but in terms of that's what he learned in Shem ve'Ever, how to deal with an Asa, how to deal with when it's not an idea. Unfortunately, the world isn't usually an idea. You have to know how to deal with wicked people. You have to know when to give in and say, okay, I'm not getting involved. Let them do. And then when you're going to make a stand, when you have to go down in sometimes you have to go down in the dirt and get dirty with them, so to speak, and know how to deal with them. That's what he was learning in Yeshiva Shem ve'Ever. It turns how to deal with life, taking the Torah principles and applying them to everyday life. So that you need someone who's actually involved in the world to know how the world works. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that going back to the Tower of Bavel, it goes into this idea of chaos, right? Because that's when all the language was created, and then they couldn't complete the job. It became chaotic. Isn't that interesting?
Right. So.
Right? Isn't that? I think that's interesting, right?
Let's say I didn't get to say that point over here.
When they were building the Tower of Bavel, right? What ended up happening was they couldn't communicate properly. It became chaos. Right, so they couldn't.
They're speaking different language. Yeah,
right.
That was chaos, and they were pushing each other off, and they were
right.
Right, there was a unity, but it was the lowest common denominator. Usually, unity is supposed to be a good thing, but let's say in certain countries, it's the bottom line. Is everyone's all the same on the lowest level as opposed to on a different level? So to put the two, to summarize, to put the two midrashim together, whatever happened to the Tower of Bavel? So there's a third of it was destroyed. A third of it was sunk in the ground and pops up once in a while. And a third is so big that you look down from it, all the people look like grasshoppers. So that fits into what was the motivation behind building it. So the third that's destroyed, we no longer have. No one fights wars against God. Why not, just join them. God's on this side, and therefore that's totally, we don't have that concept today. No one's fighting against God. They have God with them. The third that's buried in the ground pops up once in a while, this concept of world peace, it's a great idea, but practically it's very hard, to implement. No one's listening to anyone. Everyone's doing it. Speaking of chaos, what's going on today in the Middle East and all over with the dictatorships and all that. And the third that's still very much around that's taking the hand of God, or whether it's everyday miracles, the special situations that happen all over, but especially in Israel, taking things, God's events, and turning them into everyday things, and not seeing the hand of God. That's the tower is so big that if you go on top of there, everyone looks like that. We still have to. That's the challenge of our day. With, as I said, it was I think one of the rabbis, it was with his Hasidim, he was running away probably during the Holocaust or somewhere. He ended up in Russia. So he told one of his students, you know what, get me a paper. To one of the Hasidim, the students built up the guts to say to the Rebbe, but Rebbe, you don't speak Russian. You can't read Russian. Why am I getting you a Russian paper? He said, yeah, but it's in between the lines that's important. It's not what you're reading in the New York Times. You got to read in between the lines, and it's seeing seeing through the net. That was the whole miracle. That's the whole story of Purim. God behind the scenes, and that's what we have to learn to see in our everyday events. See the hand of God, and appreciate the things that we have daily, and also on special occasions.
Can you comment a bit on how agreement is arrived at, say, because
they've got to establish so much
has been decided over the centuries, what is the right way to behave, all sorts of rules and regulations. How does it actually come about? I know that there's a discussion between rabbis. We know how the Talmud at least was. But has that sort of continued? I mean, it's a long time since anyone has added to the Talmud itself.
No, so we're constantly adding, because in other words, the principles on Mount Sinai never changed. God gave the principles to Moses.
Okay.
That's eternal.
Yeah.
But each generation, the rabbis of each generation have to take the principles and apply. Like today, whether it's electricity, things, events that we never had before. So basically, you go back and find the principles in the Talmud or before, and then that's why you'll have a dispute. Electricity, how does it work? And then you have to go back and find the sources. So we're constantly taking the principles, because the Torah is eternal, and God gave it for every generation. So our job is to take the principles and live with them even today. So obviously, we can't argue on the Talmud today, but the Talmud is just giving us principles. It's not giving us bottom line. That's why that was the greatness of the oral law. That's why Rebbe was very hesitant to put it into print, because he knows once you put something into print, it loses its dynamic. Part of the oral law was the back and forth, working it out. The concern was once you put something into print, it becomes static, and therefore things get back. Today, we can't argue on the Talmud. So in a certain sense, the Talmud has the same status, not from a sanctity point of view, but we can't argue on the Bible. We can't argue on the Talmud. But it's taking the principles and applying it. So we're constantly involved, especially this century. Every day new books are, because they're called Shilohs V'Tshuvas. Questions are asked day as we're talking now. All over the world, people have modern day questions come up based on whether it's new technology, medical ethics. Now that we have this keeping people alive, what's considered death? What organ transplant. We could go on and on constantly. New things are coming out all the time, because that's the dynamic of the Torah. That is, it's good during the time of Moses' time. It was good 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago, and the same Torah you could use for this. Obviously, you're going to get different results when you apply it to this society. You have to have the rabbis of the generation take the principles and learn to, and it's a constant struggle. That's what we do all the time, and that's why it's not one answer, because there could be different sources. They'll debate over what they think is the appropriate source for this law, and they'll say, no, it's not the way it works, and that's all part of it. God gave the Torah to human beings. It says it's not in heaven. He gave it to us to work on it and to figure it out.